There was a real sense of fear in the Clifton area of Bristol.
We're asking for the freedom to walk the streets after dark.
There have been numerous sex attacks over the past few months.
I try not to walk out at night.
They were very nasty attacks.
There was the need for us to do something rather special.
We were asked if you'd like to volunteer doing some decoy work.
It's scary to think that we were that close to a killer.
But the police eventually got their man, and Ronald Evans was jailed in 1979.
Ronald Evans, back in the 70s, when he went to court, thought that he'd got away with those offences he wasn't charged and convicted of.
For two of his victims, a quarter of a century had passed and they hadn't seen justice.
And I can still see his face. They must be feeling the same way, reliving that terror.
We needed to review any stranger rape offence to see whether or not forensic science could be used to identify offenders.
With the advent of DNA, his past caught up with him.
For 25 years, Ronald Evans, the Clifton rapist, has been growing old in prison. But now it's 2004 and the 63-year-old is weeks away from release. Freedom is within his grasp. In the late 1970s, 7 women were attacked during Ronald Evans's reign of terror. But when he was caught, he admitted only 5. What about those other attacks? Was another rapist at large, or was Ronald Evans responsible for these too?
So my name is Gary Mason. I was asked to set up the Avon Somerset Coldcase team. It was decided that we needed to review any stranger rape offence to see whether or not forensic science could be used to identify offenders. So the first thing I had to do was identify, well, how many offences are we talking about? Surprisingly, we were talking a couple thousand offences.
Near the top of the pile of unsolved cases was the Grove Road rape from November 1977. The victim was a 21-year-old foreign au pair. The file left by detectives at the time included a laboratory report, and scientists now told Gary Mason that the victim's clothes had been kept in storage, preserved perfectly for 25 years.
It was about 5-6 weeks later, they said, remember that case, Grove Road, you asked us to look at? We've got full DNA profile from it. So, of course, I'm getting very excited. And they say, but not only that, we've loaded it on the DNA database and it's come back with a match. We know whose DNA it is. So I said, well, I got my pen in my hand and they gave me the name of Ronald Evans.
And what did that name mean to you then?
It meant absolutely nothing to me. And I think probably because I didn't respond when they gave me the name, they said, you do realise who that is? And I said no, thinking it's not someone famous or something, is it? And they said, that's the Clifton rapist.
There have been numerous sex attacks over the past few months.
There was a real sense of fear in the Clifton area of Bristol.
We're asking for the freedom to walk the streets after dark.
This is the photo fit picture of the actual attacker.
The police investigation in the 1970s had caught and convicted Evans for 5 attacks, but he denied the Grove Road rape, and detectives had never really been convinced he was the offender. Now, modern science said it had to have been him.
My name is Rob Calloway. In 2004, I was a detective constable on the Avon Somerset Major Crime Team. I think that Ronald Evans, back in the 70s, when he went to court, thought that he'd got away with those offences he wasn't charged and convicted of. And really, his past caught up with him with the advent of DNA.
But there was a second unsolved case. From Parry's Lane in December 1978, a student who'd moved from Europe was attacked as she walked home. This had been classed as an attempted rape. Gary Mason found this paperwork in files about Ronald Evans's solved crimes. It had sat, forgotten, in a storeroom in the attic of this police station. But the files had more.
I found a brown A4 envelope, and in it was a plastic bag, and in that plastic bag was about 10 plastic tubes, which each contained swabs for sexual offences. They were sealed, and I looked at the name on the outside, and it was my victim that I just had a DNA hit from.
DNA hits and links in the paperwork, evidence left by Ronald Evans more than 2 decades earlier, could now be used against him. But where was he, and had he changed?
We didn't know for sure he was still in prison at that point.
The first thing that shocked me was they said, oh, he's about to be released into an open prison because we're in the process of him being released out into the public again.
Actually, he was coming up for a review of whether he should be out on parole. We had a bit of a clock ticking situation.
So I said, well, what do I have to do to stop him going to an open prison? I need to speak to him about a couple sexual assaults.
What did you think when you heard that he was just about to be released, but hang on, here's a chance that actually he might well be staying back in?
Great. I thought it's good. At last, justice will be done.
The Coldcase team drove to the prison in Devon. There, they arrested an unsuspecting Ronald Evans who was preparing for release.
When I met him, he was thin, balding, wearing glasses. He didn't look much of a threat, and he was very personable when we met him as well. When I introduced myself and told him what I was there for, he was very, very shocked. And initially he thought that it was a deliberate ploy on our part because he knew he was coming up for a review of parole.
But it wasn't a ploy by the police. The Coldcase team had firm evidence linking Evans to the 2 unsolved attacks. He was going back to court. When police charged Evans for these historic attacks, there was a renewed interest from the press.
Ronald Evans, a 63-year-old former electrician, was told he faced a count of rape, attempted rape and 4 counts of indecent assault, which are alleged to have taken place in Bristol. Bespectacled and wearing a padded jacket.
And I was in court as Evans made his first appearance.
This case was heard before Bristol magistrates in court number 1, and it lasted just 2 minutes. Ronald Evans spoke only to confirm his name and address, and the case was adjourned for a hearing before Bristol Crown Court next Tuesday.
He was returned to prison after the 3rd day, after we'd charged him, and then it was a case of preparing the files. Both ladies agreed to come to Bristol, and both provided me with some very, very detailed victim impact statements.
It was an overseas student who was working over here, and they had to get her back. She came back to England 25 years later, was it?
Generally, an impact statement, you may have had a few months or even a year for the victim to come to terms with what had happened and put in on paper how it had affected them. But with both these ladies, we're talking about over 20 years experience. So it was almost like a life study on how it had affected them.
Michelle Leonard had been part of the police team that caught Evans. She'd been prepared as much as possible for his attack, but when he struck, it was still traumatising. What must it have been like for those unsuspecting victims?
When I recall what I was doing, he grabbed me from behind, round the throat, round the arm, the waist, and said, "Don't scream, I'll kill you," and started to pull me backwards. And I can still see his face now, as I did then. They must be feeling the same way. Reliving that terror. How they can possibly completely forget about it, I don't know.
The trial was set for December 2004. Evans was now admitting the Grove Road attack, but was denying the Parry's Lane one.
It's the first time I've seen him in 25 years. So that poor woman had to come to England to give evidence of 25 years ago of a horrific incident, what had happened to her.
When the ladies told us that she wouldn't wear high heels ever since that incident, just so if she had a necessity to run, she could do so.
She never, from that day onwards, travelled abroad. She didn't like travelling on her own. She didn't travel very far from her hometown. Whenever she used to go out for a walk, she would always walk towards the middle of the road, so no one could jump out from bushes.
They were unable to have such close relationships as they would like to, so the issues of trust.
To be fair to her, she did travel to come to England. I thought that was so brave of her.
On the morning of his trial, Ronald Evans stood in the dock here at Bristol Crown Court and was asked how he would plead. And he replied with one word twice:
guilty. In the moments after, those harrowing victim impact statements were read to the court. Sitting in the public gallery, watching on, listening in, was one of his other victims. Now, she'd seen justice 25 years earlier, but she hadn't seen her attacker since then. And the impact of what he did to her back in 1978 was clear to those sitting next to her.
I held her hand because she was shaking so much, and I said, "Are you sure you're all right? Do you want to go?" She said, "No, I want to stay," she said. But her words were, "I thought I was over this man, but I'm obviously not." And I thought, yeah, the impact that what he did to her 25 years ago is still with her. And she still hasn't got over what happened to her. And it's a life sentence for the victim as well as, and he should have a life sentence, I think, really.
In 1979, Evans was convicted of 5 assaults near White Ladies Road in Clifton in Bristol. Now, in 2005, he was convicted of rape. He was going back to prison.
I had no doubt at the time we dealt with him that he was still a danger to women. When he got sentenced to another 10 years, I was quite happy. And his life licence was revoked again, so I knew he was going back to prison for a long time.
I thought that in his 60s he could still be a risk to females. I thought that maybe going back to prison for a significant amount of time was the right thing to keep him out of harm's way.
But this story doesn't end there, because on a cold day in January 2019, an old man on a walking stick shuffled out of jail. Ronald Evans had spent a total of 57 of his 79 years behind bars. He was Britain's longest-serving prisoner. And despite convictions for murder, rape and sexual assault, a parole board deemed him fit for release. An injunction prevents him from returning to Bristol, the city he terrorised back in the 1970s.
I suppose I'm horrified, really. Last time I knew him, in 2003-04, he was still a danger to the public as far as I was concerned.
Well, I hope now that he is no longer a risk to members of the public, and I hope that he understands why he served so long.
I think they'll always have that something in them that makes them be able to do that sort of thing. I don't think that ever goes.
He's 81. He's not, as far as we're aware, committed another offence. He's served his punishment, but I feel sorry for the women that were attacked, who quite clearly are probably still affected in some way or other by his attacks.
I don't know how somebody has managed to convince everybody that he is now safe, but he would have gone through a parole board hearing, and they've obviously decided that he is, in their wisdom, safe to be within the community.
While the Coldcase team had finally secured convictions for Evans's old attacks, it was Operation Argus, with its covert policing, unreliable radios and brave decoy officers, that originally brought Evans to book.
It was completely unique, a bizarre thing to do, very forward-thinking, really, of its time. And I just think, yeah, it was a good job, well done.
The operation helped other people realise around the country that, you know, this can be done and it does actually work.
We were very lucky, all of us, not to become a victim.
I always think if I'd have been 100 metres away in a car with the 2 policemen and he'd never seen them, what would he have done that night? Was there a chance another woman could have been attacked?
If he had to have been caught, I think he would have murdered again. I think he would have probably got more, somebody would have resisted eventually.
I've been in many, many scrapes, but that one moment in my life has set me off on the career that I took.
Done surveillance for drugs and other things, but nothing has ever compared to that. It was brilliant.
The operation to catch the Clifton rapist changed the secret face of covert policing in the late 1970s. But what, you might ask, has changed over the last 40 years about women's safety? Police today have tools and techniques that detectives back then could only have dreamt of. But has anything really got any better?
There's women being attacked still. We've got better education. We're supposed to be more civilised, aren't we? So why do men have this need to attack women or abuse women? That's a bigger picture, really.